Rain hammered against the glass walls of the penthouse office, high above the city, an office that once felt like a possibility to Sandra, a young black woman with a quiet strength, and now felt like the edge of a cliff. She stood across from Tony Nelson, a white billionaire CEO whose calm, polished exterior had fooled her for far too long. Between them lay a future she had rehearsed in her mind 1,000 different ways. But not like this. Never like this. On the table sat the pregnancy test she had carried in her handbag for 3 days. 3 days of terror. 3 days of hope. 3 days of believing that maybe the man who whispered about freedom in hotel rooms, who traced her jawline as though memorizing it, who told her she was the one place he felt real, would step toward her instead of away. But Tony didn't even look at her. He stared out at the night skyline, as if it deserved more attention than she did. He held a check in one hand. 6 zeros. Cold. Sterile. Dead. Here, he said flatly. The check hit the glass table with a soft slap. Something inside Sandra cracked. She didn't touch it. Didn't breathe. Didn't blink. This will take care of everything, he added, still facing the window. The procedure. Relocation. A fresh start. Her stomach lurched. A fresh start. She whispered, "Is that what you think this is? I'm trying to be practical." "No, Tony." Her voice trembled. "You're being a coward." He turned then, and everything she loved about him, all the softness, the warmth, the late-night confessions, was gone, replaced by cold calculation. The kind of emptiness inherited from boardrooms, and a father who treated feelings like liabilities. "You knew what this was," he said. "No." She shot back. "I knew what you pretended this was." Silence fell heavy between them. The kind of silence that tells you the truth is about to hurt more than the lie. Tony sighed, exasperated. "Sandra, I'm getting engaged in 6 months. The merger depends on it. This," he gestured vaguely at her stomach, "complicates everything. So I'm a complication." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Sandra lifted the check with shaking fingers, not because she wanted it, but because she needed to see the number 6 zeros, designed to erase her, erase a life, erase the possibility of something real. She let the check fall back onto the table. "You told me you loved me," she said quietly. Tony's jaw tightened. "I told you what you wanted to hear." The words punched the air from her lungs. She swallowed, forcing herself to stand tall. "There's a heartbeat in me." "There doesn't have to be," he said, in an icy and final tone. For a moment, just a moment, she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of fatherhood, but fear of losing control. Fear of doing something unscripted. Fear of choosing love over legacy. She stepped back like he was fire. "I hope you remember this moment," she said, voice breaking but unbowed, "because one day it'll be the moment that ruins you. Sandra, don't." She grabbed her coat and purse. "You don't get to say my name like it still means something to you." He followed her to the door. His face twisted with something she almost mistook for regret. But regret was too kind a word for what he gave her. "You have 48 hours, he said quietly. "After that, my lawyers. I don't care about your lawyers." She pressed a hand to her stomach. more to steady herself than anything else. I will make my own choice, and you will live with yours. She walked out before he could respond. Down the elevator, through the marble lobby, past the security guard, who nodded at her as if it were a typical night. Out into a storm that felt more honest than anything Tony had ever said to her. Rain soaked her hair, her clothes, her hopes. Thunder cracked above her as if the sky itself was angry on her behalf. She walked for blocks, her heels slipping on wet pavement. Lightning lit up the city, revealing tears streaming down her face, mascara running like war paint. Her hand rested on her still flat stomach. I'm here, she whispered to the life inside her. I'm here, and I'm choosing you. A bolt of lightning flashed across the sky so bright she flinched. She took it as a sign, a warning, a blessing. She didn't know. All she knew was that she was alone, soaked, terrified, and yet something inside her was shifting, hardening, becoming steel. She pressed her hand more firmly to her stomach. We're going to survive this, she vowed. I don't know how, but we will. Sandra didn't look back. Not once, because if she did, she might break. And she couldn't break. Not now. Not with a heartbeat inside her, the first heartbeat that truly mattered. As she reached the corner, a gust of wind nearly knocked her sideways. She grabbed a streetlight to steady herself. Cars splashed by, indifferent to her anguish. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Tony's name. Again and again. She threw the phone into the nearest garbage can. Let him live in silence. Let him live with the choice he made. Sandra found herself standing under the awning of a closed bakery, breathing hard, rain dripping from her chin. She whispered to her unborn child, You're not a mistake. You're not a complication. You're mine. Her legs trembled, but her will hardened. And as she pushed away from the awning and walked into the storm, she felt something unfamiliar but powerful swelling inside her. Strength. This wasn't the ending Tony had thought it would be. It was the beginning. If you're still here with me, if you're feeling Sandra's pain, her courage, her fire, go ahead. And like this video so more people can join this journey. Drop a comment if your heart already chooses her side. And subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because trust me, the storm tonight is nothing compared to the one still coming. The morning after the storm, Sandra didn't wake up. She rose. There's a difference. Her decision had taken shape in the night, while the rain tapped against her Aunt Rosalind's window like a warning or a promise. She spent the dark hours staring at the ceiling, hand on her stomach, realizing her life had split into a before and after. Before Tony's decision, after she chose herself. By sunrise, she had packed. Her apartment, paid for by Tony, felt suddenly foreign. Too glass, too cold, too full of his shadow. She placed her key on the counter next to a glass of water she hadn't finished the night before. It looked like the last remnant of a life she no longer wanted. A life she was leaving behind, without a trace. No note, no forwarding address. No chance for him to justify, negotiate, or manipulate. On the bus heading out of the city, she sat near the back, watching skyscrapers fade into smaller buildings, then into open stretches of road. She didn't cry. She had cried enough in the rain. Now she was empty, and in that emptiness, she found clarity. Every vibration of her phone was accompanied by Tony's name lighting up the screen, until she finally powered it off. At a rest stop, she tossed the phone into a trash can beside a half-eaten sandwich. That, too, was a choice. 8 hours later, the bus pulled into the small coastal town where she had spent childhood summers with Rosalind. The moment Sandra stepped off, the scent of salt water wrapped around her like an embrace she didn't know she needed. Rosalind was already on the porch when Sandra walked up the path, arms crossed, lips pressed tight, eyes softening the moment she saw the suitcase. "You're shaking," Rosalind murmured, pulling her inside. "Sit down before you fall." Sandra didn't make it to the chair. She collapsed into her aunt's arms, sobs ripping through her. Not delicate or quiet, but raw, like the body's way of finally releasing everything she'd been holding in since the penthouse. Rosalind stroked her hair. "Let it out, baby." Storms pass faster when you don't pretend they're sunshine. Later that night, in the small attic bedroom with faded wallpaper and a lopsided lamp, Sandra lay awake listening to the ocean. It didn't soothe her. It reminded her she was small. The world was big, and choices carried consequences. In the morning, she found Rosalind making coffee, the kitchen smelling like warmth and forgiveness. Sandra sat at the table, hands wrapped around the mug. "I'm pregnant," she said finally. Rosalind didn't react the way Sandra feared. No judgment, no pity, just steady acceptance. "Well," she said, "then we do what women have always done. We get stronger." Days turned into weeks. Sandra enrolled in online graphic design courses. She worked late into the night, nausea twisting her stomach, determination keeping her upright. She built a small portfolio, taking commissions from local cafes and small businesses. And then came the appointment. The ultrasound room was dim, quiet, filled with the hum of machinery. Sandra lay back, nerves coiling inside her. When the technician frowned, her heart stopped. "What's wrong?" Sandra whispered. The woman smiled suddenly. "Nothing's wrong. Honey, you're having 3. Sandra sat up too fast. 3 what babies? 3 little heartbeats. Triplets. The room spun. Triplets. Not one life. 3. 3 futures. 3 reasons to fight harder than she ever had. 3 souls she had to raise on grit, faith, and a paycheck that barely existed. She covered her mouth, tears spilling, not of fear, not of regret, but of awe. The months that followed were brutal, relentless sickness, exhaustion that made her bones ache, panic attacks she hid from Rosalind. Yet every kick inside her reminded her she wasn't alone. She talked to them every night, told them stories, made promises she refused to break. "You'll never feel unwanted," she whispered to her belly, not for 1 second. When labor came early, far too early, the world blurred into alarms, rushing nurses, and Rosalind's voice saying, "Breathe, baby, breathe." She did. She fought. She screamed. And then 3 cries, 3 tiny miracles were placed against her chest. Lorelei, Emily, Caspian. Sandra pressed shaky kisses to their small foreheads and whispered, "I will never let anyone make you feel like you shouldn't be here, not even him." The years that followed were survival, not in the poetic sense, but the practical one: diapers, sleepless nights, medical appointments, 3 babies crying at once, and a woman refusing to break, no matter how close she came. She built a small business from her kitchen table. She built a life from ashes. She built a home filled with laughter instead of disappointment. By their 3rd birthday, the triplets were vibrant, unique, chaotic little storms of personality. And Sandra rarely thought about Tony except in passing. A man she once loved, a lesson she survived, until the email arrived. A significant design conference, a career-changing opportunity. In the city, she fled. Her finger hovered over the delete key, but she thought of her children, of the future she wanted for them. She clicked accept. She had no idea that walking into that conference meant walking straight back into her past, straight back into the man who had once shattered her and would soon collide with the 3 children he never knew existed. The storm wasn't over. It was only gathering speed. Sandra returned to the city with a mission, not a sense of nostalgia. She had rehearsed her presentation slides, printed extra portfolios, and packed the triplets' favorite blankets for their stay with Rosalind. She thought she had prepared for everything, except him. The conference was a swirling maze of creativity and competition. Sandra walked through the exhibition hall with a steady stride, absorbing energy and scanning opportunities, while fighting the rush of insecurity that whispered she didn't belong in a room full of designers with elite degrees and glossy resumes. But work had sharpened her instincts. Survival had shaped her confidence. Motherhood had taught her endurance. By day 2, she found her rhythm. She spoke about her design process with clarity and showed her branding work with pride. And when gallery owner Jasmine Park stopped at her booth, her world shifted silently. Jasmine was sharp, stylish, a woman who saw beyond the surface. She studied Sandra's portfolio with an attention that made the moment feel heavier. "Your work has soul," Jasmine said finally. "Real soul, and artistry born from lived experience. That's rare." Sandra blinked, stunned. "Thank you. I try to be honest in everything I design. You are, and that's the difference." Jasmine tapped one of the logo concept's broken lines, forming a phoenix. "This is what rebirth looks like on paper." Sandra felt heat bloom in her chest. It had been a long time since anyone recognized her for something other than resilience. They talked for over an hour about the industry, failures, and second chances. Jasmine didn't pity Sandra's struggles. She respected them. "I want you to handle my gallery rebrand," Jasmine said. "A complete identity rebuild." Sandra almost dropped her tablet. "Are you serious?" "Completely." Jasmine extended her hand. "I see talent. I invest in talent." Sandra shook her hand, trying not to cry. This was more than a job. This was a door finally opening. She left the convention hall that evening glowing with accomplishment. For the first time in a long time, she felt worthy of good things, deserving of more than survival. But as she walked down the crowded street outside the venue, her phone buzzed with a message from Rosalind, photos of the triplets at dinner. Caspian is showing off a noodle on his nose. Emily is concentrating on her coloring book. Lorelei announced she wanted to be a queen when she grew up. Sandra smiled at the pictures, stepped into the crosswalk and froze. Ahead, cameras flashed wildly near the entrance of an upscale restaurant. Men in tailored suits laughed loudly, flanked by security. The energy was loud, corporate, and powerful. and he was in the center. Tony Nelson. He wasn't the man she remembered, not fully. His hair was touched with gray, his beard slightly thicker, his posture heavier, as if carrying weight no one else could see. His suit fit him perfectly, but something in his eyes looked tired, drained, lonely in ways power never cured. Sandra didn't intend to look at him long, maybe just a passing glance. But fate wasn't merciful. Tony turned. His gaze swept the crowd and caught her. The moment snapped as a wire pulled too tight. His face went pale, actually pale. His hand gripped the doorframe, knuckles white, as though the sight of her stole the ground from under him. Sandra felt her breath seize, panic pulsing beneath her ribs. People walked around her, unaware they were passing through the opening scene of a storm 3 years in the making. Tony took one step forward, then another, pushing through his group, ignoring their voices. His expression was a collision of disbelief, guilt, hope, and devastation. Sandra's pulse hammered. Her feet turned before her mind did. She walked away fast, controlled, refusing to run. Running would give him power. She ducked around a corner, leaning hard against a brick wall. Her breath stuttered out, sharp and uneven. Her heart wouldn't slow. Why now? Why here? Why? When she finally felt steady, she slid down the wall into a crouch, burying her face in her hands. She whispered a curse under her breath, not because she was weak, but because some wounds ache even after the scar forms. Tony hadn't seen the children, yet. But she felt something profound and terrifying settle in her gut. He would look for her. He would find her. And nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, she boarded the bus home with trembling fingers and a contract worth more money than she had ever dreamed of earning. When she arrived, the triplets tackled her with screams of joy, and she held them longer than usual, breathing them in like oxygen. Rosalind noticed the stiffness in her shoulders. "You saw him?" Sandra nodded, eyes hollow. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. "You are one," Rosalind said softly, "a ghost he buried alive." Later that night, while the children slept, Sandra sat on the sofa staring at the shadows on the ceiling. She tried to dismiss the fear, the lingering ache. She told herself Tony would move on with his rich friends, his perfect life, his spotless reputation. But something in his eyes last night had warned her, no, he wouldn't move on this time. 2 weeks later, while Sandra pushed the kids in the swings at the park, she felt the sensation of being watched. Her skin prickled. Her heart stumbled. She turned slowly. He stood by the entrance. Tony. His eyes weren't cold, or calculating, or dismissive now. They were raw, cracked open, haunted. Then he saw the triplets. Sandra watched him calculate their ages, watched his face fall as understanding struck like thunder, saw the earthquake in his expression as he realized the life he had rejected had grown into 3 small, breathing, laughing human beings. He swayed slightly, gripping the fence for balance. Lorelei ran to Sandra's side, noticing her mother stiffen. "Mama, who is that?" "Nobody," Sandra said firmly. Tony took 1 step forward. She raised a hand sharply. "Don't." Her voice carried enough sharpness to freeze the swings midair. "Don't come anywhere near them." He stopped, chest rising and falling too fast. Sandra gathered her children. "We're leaving." As she walked away, She felt Tony watching. She imagined the guilt crushing him. But guilt did nothing to repair the past. It did nothing to protect her babies. She wouldn't let him rewrite what he had destroyed. But deep down, under anger and fear, something else flickered a warning. Tony Nelson had seen his children, and that single truth carried the power to unravel everything she had built, everything she had survived. The storm was no longer approaching. It had arrived. Tony sat alone in his penthouse office, the same place where he had once placed a check on the table like a weapon, and stared at the photographs scattered across his desk. 3 children. 1 truth. 1,000 regrets. The private investigator he hired had been thorough. Coldly thorough. The report itemized the last 3 years of Sandra's life, her address, her business, her daily routines, her struggles, each line a punch to his gut. She had done everything alone. No support, no handouts, no help from him. He swallowed hard as he traced a finger over a photo of Lorelei, pushing Emily on a swing. Caspian is chasing pigeons in the background. Their faces held echoes of him, his jawline, his dimples, his eyes. He whispered to the empty room, "They're mine." For the first time, the word didn't sound like possession. It sounded like a wound. An ugly truth echoed inside him. He had abandoned them before they took their first breath. Tony rubbed his temples, a migraine brewing between memory and guilt. He called his lawyer, inquired about his rights, options, and next steps. She spoke in legal terms: custody, visitation, paternity tests, but every word sounded like warfare. He fired her. He didn't want a battle. He wanted absolution. But absolution was not something a man like him received simply because he finally wanted it. His father's voice echoed from years of pressure. Legacy matters. Appearances matter. Weakness is unacceptable. But for the first time, Tony didn't care about legacy, or appearances, or any of the rules drilled into him. He only cared about 3 small children who didn't know his name. He drove to Sandra's town the next morning. He didn't plan to approach her, to see where she lived, to understand the world she had built without him. Her home was small, worn, and filled with light from the windows, as well as drawings taped loosely to the glass. A tricycle leaned against the porch. A basket of shoes sat beside the door. The house looked alive, full of noise, love, chaos, everything he didn't know how to provide. He watched from afar as Sandra loaded the kids into her van. They squabbled, laughed, and climbed over each other. She lifted Caspian into his seat with ease, her strength born from routine, not luxury. Her smile exhausted. Beautiful hit him square in the chest. He whispered, "I should have been there." But guilt wasn't enough. He followed them to the park, keeping his distance. His hands shook as he watched them play, memorizing every detail. When Sandra saw him, her expression hardened into steel. The fear in her eyes wasn't for herself. It was for them. Her command to stay away sliced through him. He wanted to run to her, fall to his knees, and beg forgiveness. But the look on her face told him the truth. Forgiveness wasn't owed. Trust wasn't owed. Access wasn't owed. And maybe he didn't deserve any of it. But he couldn't walk away. He tried. He got as far as his car door, hand on the handle. But something in him snapped the part that had pretended for too long that choices were simple. Tony wasn't a good man, but he wanted to be a better one. He spent the next week consumed by a single thought. How do you become someone worthy of the children you once rejected? His father's disapproval exploded the moment he confessed the truth. The elder Nelson paced the office, fury dominating every movement. You will end this nonsense. You will protect the family name. You will stay away from that woman and her children. My children. Tony corrected quietly. His father slammed a hand on the desk. Not anymore. You forfeited that when you let this situation happen. This is beneath us. Tony stared at the man who had raised him. For the first time, he truly saw him small, rigid, terrified of anything real. And he realized something profound. He didn't want to become him. That night, Tony found himself pacing in his empty penthouse, listening to the silence that surrounded him like punishment. His life was a monument to success, but devoid of substance. All he could think about was the shock in Sandra's eyes, the way Caspian smiled, the way Emily studied the ground, the defiant jut of Lorelei's chin. He had no right to know these things, but he wanted to learn. He showed up the next day at the grocery store, not intentionally, but because he couldn't stop thinking about them. When he saw Sandra struggling to balance groceries and wrangle 3 children, he instinctively reached for a box on the top shelf. Can I help? Sandra froze. No, it's just a box. I'm not trying anything. She snatched it from him anyway. Stay away. He nodded, respecting her boundaries, but stayed at the other end of the aisle just long enough to make sure she got out to the parking lot safely. He hated himself for it, hated how invasive it felt. But his fear of repeating his father's failures pushed him harder than caution did. Days passed. Tony appeared again at the beach where Caspian built crooked sandcastles, at the market where Emily picked out fruit with serious concentration, at the pier where Lorelei tried to touch the water. Sandra's tolerance thinned to anger. You're stalking us, she snapped one afternoon. You lost the right to be in their lives. Accept that. Tony swallowed hard. I saw them. I can't unsee it. You were supposed to choose us, she said. You chose yourself. Let me fix it. You can't fix 3 years of absence with good intentions. But Tony kept coming back, not pushing, not demanding, just existing in the only spaces he knew she wouldn't throw him out of. Every time he saw them, something in him cracked further. Then the moment that changed everything happened at the emergency room. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to know. But fate had a cruel sense of timing. When he saw Sandra's van speed off toward the hospital, hazard lights flashing, he followed out of instinct more than logic. Emily was burning up with fever, limp in Sandra's arms. Lorelei and Caspian cried in the waiting room, terrified and confused. Sandra was shaking, torn between staying by Emily's bedside and soothing her other 2 children. Tony stepped forward. Let me help. She stared at him, ready to curse him out, but then Caspian ran to him, sobbing. Instinct overrode pride. Fine, she whispered. Stay with them. Don't leave this room. He didn't. For 6 hours. He held them, wiped tears, told stories, played games, whispered reassurances he wasn't sure he had the right to give. When Sandra returned exhausted but relieved, she found her children asleep on Tony's lap, safe in his arms. She whispered, "Thank you." Tony lifted his head, eyes shining. "Please let me try. Sandra, just try." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at her sleeping children, at the man holding them so carefully, and something inside her cracked open. But forgiveness wasn't a gift. It was a wager. And she wasn't sure yet if Tony Nelson was worth betting on. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, steady, but edged with warning. "Supervised visits," she said, "at my house. Twice a week. You follow my rules, or it ends." Tony nodded, emotion choking him. "I won't let you down again." Sandra took her children into her arms. "You already have." Something unspoken passed between them, then raw, painful, necessary, a beginning. Not a forgiveness, but a reckoning. Tony walked out of that hospital, knowing this was his one chance. Sandra walked out knowing she had just opened the door to the one man capable of destroying her all over again. And neither of them yet understood. The hardest part hadn't even started. Tony's supervised visits began quietly, without fanfare, almost awkward in their simplicity. Sandra scheduled them in the living room, where she could see every gesture, every attempt, every failure. She sat at the far end of the couch, watching, arms crossed, emotions locked down. She didn't trust him, not with her children, not with her heart, not with anything that mattered. Tony arrived exactly on time, every visit, never a minute early, never a minute late. His movements were cautious, like someone entering sacred territory he had no right to disturb. He didn't bring gifts, no flashy toys, no extravagant gestures, just himself. It was the only thing Sandra allowed, and the only thing he had left to offer. Lorelei was the first to test him. She stood straight in front of him on that first Thursday afternoon, chin up, her small hands planted on her hips. "Why didn't you come when we were babies?" Tony blinked. The question pierced deeper than any accusation Sandra had given him. "I didn't know how to be a dad," he said quietly, "and I made the wrong choice." That's not an honest answer. Lorelei crossed her arms, mirroring Sandra in a way that startled even Sandra. Tony inhaled. "I was scared, and I was selfish, and I will regret it for the rest of my life." Lorelei didn't smile, but she nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Okay, you can stay today." It was the closest thing to forgiveness he had earned in months. Emily was different. She didn't speak much, didn't approach him, didn't offer easy smiles. Instead, she watched, eyes like rich earth, deep and quiet and knowing. She sat in the corner with her markers, drawing spirals and shapes that completely absorbed her world. Tony didn't push. He sat on the floor beside the coffee table, giving her space. After 20 silent minutes, she slid one of her drawings closer to his shoes. Not a gift, a test. He picked it up carefully. "It's beautiful," he murmured. Emily didn't respond, but she also didn't withdraw the paper. Caspian was the easiest too easy. He adored, loved, and trusted instantly. A dangerous softness Tony had never seen in himself. Caspian crawled into his lap halfway through the visit, tugging at Tony's sleeve. "Read this book to me." said. Tony did. His voice cracked halfway through. No one commented, but Sandra's grip tightened around her mug. The next visit was slightly smoother. Then the next. And the next. But progress came with shadows. Tony's determination to be present in Sandra's world didn't go unnoticed in his own, his wife, soon-to-be ex. Though the divorce paperwork was still in motion, arrived unannounced 2 weeks later. Vivian didn't ring the doorbell politely. She pounded like she owned the house, even though she didn't own anything on this quiet street, except resentment. Sandra opened the door, only a crack. "You need to leave." Vivian pushed the door wider with a manicured hand. "We need to talk." "No, we don't." "Yes, we do." Vivian's voice was ice wrapped in silk. "I know what you're doing." Sandra kept her expression flat. "What exactly am I doing?" "You're trying to take my husband." Sandra almost laughed. "Your husband filed for divorce. He's confused. And you're confusing him." Vivian stepped forward, face sharp and beautiful and radiating danger. "Your little arrangement ends now." Sandra raised an eyebrow. "You think threatening me is going to get him back? I think you're using those children to manipulate him." Sandra's voice hardened. "Those children are his." Vivian's eyes flashed. "And they're your meal ticket." Sandra stepped fully into the doorway now, blocking Vivian's view inside. "Let me be very clear. Tony made his choices. You don't get to storm into my home and blame me for the consequences of his." Vivian leaned in, voice low and venomous. "Women like you always think you can claw your way into power, into wealth, into the life men like Tony built. But trust me, he'll regret stepping down into your world. And you'll regret trying to climb into his." "I don't want his world," Sandra said. "I built my own." Vivian scoffed. Not for long. She turned sharply, heels clicking like the punctuation mark of a warning. Sandra shut the door and leaned against it, chest rising and falling too fast. She knew the danger wasn't in Vivian's words, but in her access, her influence, her connections. Sandra didn't want Tony anywhere near her life, but Vivian. Vivian terrified her more. When Tony arrived for the next supervised visit, Sandra didn't greet him. She stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "Your wife came," she said. Tony's expression collapsed. What did she say to you?" "That's not the issue," Sandra snapped. "The problem is, she thinks I'm after you. And that means she thinks she has the right to attack me. And my kids." Tony swallowed hard. "I'll handle her." "No." Sandra shook her head. "You're the problem. The chaos is following you. I can't let that near my children. I'm minimizing the damage." Tony insisted. "I'm ending everything with her cleanly, legally, permanently." Sandra's eyes flashed with the old wound. "You don't get to tell me you're fixing your mess. I don't trust you, and I don't trust the destruction that comes with you." Tony reached for her arm. "Sandra." She stepped back like he was fire. "We're done with supervised visits." His breath caught. "No, please don't do this. You're not ready to be in their lives. You think you are, but you're not." Sandra's voice cracked just enough to betray how much this hurt her. "Every time you show up, you tear something open." "I'm trying." "You've tried for 2 months," she said. "I've held this family together for 3 years. Tony's jaw clenched as he fought emotion. Please tell me what I need to do. Tell me how to stay. You can't stay, Sandra whispered. Not like this. She walked inside and closed the door before he could speak. He stood on her porch long after the sun set. Then he disappeared from her street entirely. Days passed, weeks. The supervised visits ended. Sandra expected relief. But what came instead was silence. A silence so deep and unsettling. She found herself glancing out windows, listening for a knock that never came. The children noticed too. Where's Mr. Tony Caspian asked one morning, eyes wide and confused. He's not coming anymore, Sandra said gently. Why did we do something wrong? Sandra hugged him tightly. No, you didn't do anything wrong. But her voice wavered. Lorelei stopped participating in preschool stories. Emily began drawing dark, lonely figures. Caspian cried at night. That's when Rosalind pulled Sandra aside. You're hurting them because you're scared, she said softly. Sandra bristled. I'm protecting them. You're protecting yourself, Rosalind replied. And you're not the only one meeting the consequences. Sandra wanted to argue, but the truth was sitting right in the children's eyes. Still, fear held her hostage. But Tony wasn't idle. He tore down his old life to rebuild a new one. He finalized the divorce. He left the company. He confronted his father and was disowned. He sold most of his possessions and moved into a small, old house 3 blocks from Sandra's. For the first time in his life, he had nothing. Nothing except the chance to prove he could be worthy. But Sandra didn't know how far he had fallen, or how much he had changed. And when she finally found him sitting alone on the beach late one night, staring at the ocean like it held his absolution, she realized something terrifying. He wasn't the man she left 3 years ago. He was a man breaking himself apart to build himself into someone her children deserved. Sandra stepped into the moonlight. Tony turned. Their eyes met. The world shifted, and neither of them knew which way it would break next. Tony's new house was nothing like the life he came from. The floors creaked. The walls carried the scent of old wood and sea air. And the furniture was a mismatched collection of second-hand finds. He had gone from penthouse glass to peeling paint in less than 3 months. But he liked it. He liked the quiet. He liked waking up without lies. What he didn't like was the distance growing between him and the children. He kept his promises. He stopped showing up unannounced, stopped inserting himself into spaces where he wasn't welcome. But the quiet corridor between 2 worlds, the one he chose and the one he wanted, stretched unbearably long. He filled the days with consulting work, therapy sessions, and letters he never sent. Letters to Lorelei, telling her she was brave. Letters to Emily, telling her she saw the world the way artists did. Letters to Caspian, promising he'd always protect his softness. He locked the letters in a drawer, uncertain if he'd ever earn the right to give them. One morning, he found 3 drawings taped to his front door. Crayon sketches. Childlike, colorful, unmistakable. 3 stick-figure children holding the hand of a tall figure labeled Daddy. His chest tightened so hard he had to lean against the frame to catch his breath. He didn't know if the children had put them there, or if Sandra had allowed it. But it felt like a crack in a wall he thought was permanent. And then Sandra knocked on his door. He froze. She wasn't angry. She wasn't guarded. She looked Tired. Tired in a way that spoke of long nights, comforting confused children. Tired of holding back too much. Tired from walls that were starting to suffocate her as much as they protected her. "Can we talk?" she asked. He nodded, stepping aside. Inside. She stood in his small living room, taking in the space that contrasted so sharply with his old life. "You really gave up everything," she murmured. "I didn't give it up," he corrected. "I let it go." She frowned softly. "Why?" "Because I want to be the kind of man they can look up to, the type of man you don't have to fear." Sandra's breath hitched. She didn't expect honesty. Not like this, not bare and unprotected. She sat, hands clasped. "They miss you." Tony blinked. "They do. Not in the way you think." Sandra's voice softened. "They miss consistency. They miss stability. They don't understand why you left." "I didn't leave," he whispered. "I know." The admission startled both of them. Sandra looked around the room. It was clean, but sparse. Humble. Real. A life stripped of power and ego. "You're trying," she said. "I see it." Tony swallowed. Hope flickering. "Does that mean—" "It means," she interrupted gently, "that we can start over. Slowly. Carefully." Tony's breath trembled. "Thank you." She shook her head. "Don't thank me. Just show me." He nodded. "I will." The next supervised visit was different, softer, less tense. Tony had learned each child's language. Lorelei wanted logic and honesty. Emily wanted quiet reassurance. Caspian wanted affection and presence. He gave them exactly that. And Sandra watched his hands tremble when Emily placed a drawing in his lap, watched him hold back tears when Caspian said, "I missed you," watched him smile, really smile when Lorelei asked him to push her on the swing. Each moment chipped away at something inside her. One evening, as the sun dropped low and painted the street in gold, Sandra walked Tony to the door. "You're doing well," she said softly. Tony looked at her, eyes searching. "Does that mean I'm earning your trust?" "It means you're earning theirs," she responded. "Mine will take more time." He nodded. "I'll wait." Sandra held his gaze longer than she intended. "You weren't always this person." "No," he admitted. "But I'm trying to be now." Their eyes held. Something pulsed between them, unspoken, terrifying, magnetic. Sandra broke the moment first. "Next Tuesday, same time." He nodded, voice low. "I'll be here." Weeks passed. Visits grew longer. Tension softened. Barriers shifted. The children began calling his small house Daddy's place. Sandra caught him and Caspian napping on the couch one afternoon. Emily asked him to help with a school art project. Lorelei started defending him when other kids asked why she didn't have a father before. But life has a way of testing progress. One day, Sandra returned home early to find Tony sitting at the kitchen table with all three kids. They were coloring together, laughing, their drawings scattered across the surface. He looked up when she entered. She looked at him, and something inside her shifted quietly, irrevocably. This was family. Not perfect, not simple, not painless. but real. And real is what terrified her the most. Tony stood. "I made dinner," he said. "Just spaghetti. Nothing special." She stared at him for a long moment. Too long. Then softly she said, "Stay." He froze. "Stay. For dinner." She clarified, "If you want." He wanted. Desperately. Dinner felt like a scene from the life they almost had, except now it was built on honesty, not illusion. After the kids went to bed, Sandra walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For showing up." His voice softened to a whisper. "I'm trying to show you. I won't stop." She didn't move away when he stepped closer. Didn't step back when his hand brushed hers. But she didn't step forward either. Not yet. He left. Heart pounding. Hope alive. And Sandra watched him go, unsure whether she was opening her door to redemption or to heartbreak. She wouldn't survive a second time. But one truth settled deep inside her. Something was cracking open between them, and cracks, once formed, never fully close. Sandra initially overlooked the turning point, not when it happened, not even in the weeks after. But looking back, she realized it began the night the storm rolled in, thunder shaking the windows, wind scraping the roof like fingernails. The triplets were terrified, clinging to her legs and crying over every crack in the sky. She tried to soothe them alone, juggling 3 trembling bodies, whispering reassurances she barely believed. But Caspian screamed each time thunder hit. Lorelei paced in frantic circles, and Emily hid beneath the coffee table with her hands over her ears. Sandra's heart raced. She hated storms. Always had. The sound pulled up old memories, ones she buried too deep to confront tonight. Her hands shook as she crouched to lift Emily. The lights flickered. The kids screamed. A surge of helplessness clawed through her. Then 3 soft knocks. She turned toward the door, breath trembling. Rosalind was gone visiting a cousin overnight. No one should be here. Another knock. Calm. Familiar. Sandra's breath caught. Tony. She hesitated, torn between shutting him out and letting him in. The knock came again, gentle, steady. Nothing like the violence of the storm. She opened the door, only a crack. He stood soaked, despite his coat. His hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes broad with concern. "I saw the storm coming," he said softly. "Thought you might need help." Sandra wanted to tell him no, to slam the door, to cling to the boundaries she built so carefully. But Caspian ran to the doorway, holding tight to her leg, sobbing into her jeans. Tony immediately knelt. "Hey, buddy. It's okay. I'm here." Caspian collapsed into his arms before Sandra could speak a word, and Sandra didn't have the strength to fight a battle tonight. She opened the door wider. Tony moved inside with a quiet confidence that didn't overstep. He scooped Lorelei up and held her close, murmuring calming words. He coaxed Emily out from under the table, offering her his hand, palm up, waiting patiently until she took it. Then he gently led all 3 to the couch and sat between them, a protective pillar against the storm. Sandra watched from the kitchen doorway, disbelief tightening her chest. She'd never seen her children look at a storm with anything but fear. Tonight, their fear transformed into cautious comfort simply because he was there. She made hot cocoa to calm her shaking hands. Tony guided the children through deep breaths he learned in therapy. His voice rose and fell like waves, steady, soothing. Sandra found herself breathing with them. When the storm finally calmed, the kids fell asleep on him, Lorelei on his left side, Emily on his right, Caspian in his lap. Tony didn't move. Sandra stepped forward and whispered, "You can put them down. I'll take them." Tony shook his head gently. "Let them sleep." She swallowed. "You'll be stuck there." "I don't mind." His voice held a quiet truth, a truth that made Sandra's eyes sting. She sat beside him, neither too close nor too distant. They were quiet for a long time, listening to the rain soften. "You did well," he finally said. She laughed without humor. "I fell apart." "No." He turned to her. "You held everything together." Her throat tightened. Compliments from him were dangerous. They hit old wounds and new hopes simultaneously. He hesitated before asking, "Why didn't you call me?" Sandra's eyes snapped toward him. "You don't get to ask that." He nodded, absorbing the blow without flinching. "Fair." Silence settled again. Thick, but not hostile. "You really gave up everything," she said quietly. Tony looked down at the children in his arms. "Everything I gave up was never real to begin with." She studied him carefully. This man who once broke her without blinking, now sitting here, drenched, holding 3 children like they were the only thing that made sense in his life. "What's driving this?" "Tony," she asked softly. "Guilt, regret, fear. What is it you want from us?" He swallowed hard. "I want a life I'm not ashamed of, and a family I don't walk away from." "You had that chance," she whispered. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving I won't waste it again." She shook her head. "Words are easy. I'm not offering words." He said quietly, "I'm offering myself." The sincerity in his voice made something in her crack, something she didn't want to confront. She looked at him, really looked, and felt her chest tighten. "You can't just decide to be someone new overnight." "I didn't decide overnight," he whispered. "It took losing everything to understand who I want to be." His voice dropped lower. "And who I want to be deserves to stand in the same room as you." Sandra inhaled sharply. The truth in his eyes burned her. "What if I can't trust you?" she whispered. "Then let me earn it." Her breath trembled. "Earn it how?" "By showing up," he said. "Every time. No matter what. Not just for them." His gaze held hers. "For you, too." Sandra froze. The children shifted against him, reminding her of the fragile line between hope and danger. "Finally," she whispered, "tonight isn't the night for this conversation." He nodded slowly. "Then we wait." They sat in silence, the storm finally moving out to sea. By sunrise, the children were tucked in bed, and Tony stood in the doorway ready to leave. Sandra walked him outside. "You should get out of those wet clothes," she said. Tony smiled faintly. "I will." As he reached the steps, she said his name softly. He turned. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once deep, sincere, and walked into the fading dawn. But the storm had done more than knock out the lights. It had broken something open, and neither of them could pretend they hadn't felt it. The days after the storm changed everything and changed nothing. Sandra woke each morning with an unwelcome awareness she couldn't shake. Tony's presence lingered in her home like a warm echo. The kids talked about him more, asked questions, drew pictures, looked out the window as though expecting him to walk up the driveway. Sandra tried to ground herself in routine work, cooking, cleaning, mothering, but there was a new tension threading through the days, a fragile connection forming between two people who weren't sure they could survive trying again. And then the world cracked open again. The warning arrived in the form of a phone call. Sandra answered distractedly, stirring oatmeal. "Hello," a sharp, clipped voice snapped through the line. "This is Cassandra Holt from Child Family Services. We received an anonymous report." Sandra went cold. A report about what concerns regarding the stability of the children's environment. The spoon clattered to the floor. "You're mistaken. I'm afraid not. We'll be conducting a home visit this Friday." Sandra's voice shook. Who filed the report? It was anonymous, but Sandra knew. Vivian. The kitchen blurred. Her breath came fast, shallow. "My children are safe," she whispered. "They are safe. We'll confirm that during the visit," the woman said. Sandra hung up with shaking hands, her legs buckled, and she braced herself against the counter. They were going to investigate her. Her. The woman who raised 3 babies alone while battling fear, exhaustion, and heartbreak. Someone dared suggest she was unfit. The triplets ran into the kitchen laughing about spilled juice, but Sandra couldn't hear them. The world had narrowed into a tunnel of panic. Rosalind found her minutes later, still standing frozen. One look at her, and Rosalind set down her purse. "What happened?" Sandra broke. The words spilled out in a torrent. Fear, anger, betrayal. Rosalind wrapped her arms around her, fierce and grounding. "We'll fight this," Rosalind said. "You've done nothing wrong." But fear had already found its way into Sandra's bones. She called Tony last. When he answered, she didn't bother with pleasantries. "Did you tell her? Did you tell Vivian where we live?" Tony's breath hitched. "Sandra. No. I swear to you I didn't. She filed a report." Sandra said, "Child Services are coming." Silence. Heavy, horrified. "Then I'm so sorry. That doesn't fix anything. I'll fix this. I'll make it right. You made this mess." Sandra snapped. "You brought danger to my door." Sandra. She hung up. For the first time, she regretted letting him in. The following days were tight, brittle, and anxiety-ridden. Sandra scrubbed the house, though it was already spotless. She organized records, photos, and documents, all while trying to keep the kids calm. On Thursday night, she barely slept. At 10 a.m. on Friday, the caseworker arrived. She walked through the home, inspecting rooms, checking the food, and talking to the triplets. They, sweet and naive, told her everything: favorite meals, bedtime stories, their dreams, and the man they'd just begun to trust. Daddy Tony. Sandra's stomach twisted. The caseworker asked questions deep, personal, invasive. Sandra answered each one, voice steady but hands trembling behind her back. Finally, the woman closed her notebook. "Your home is stable. Your children are thriving. There are no signs of neglect or risk." Sandra exhaled so sharply she almost collapsed. "We will still note the presence of the biological father. the woman added. The report mentioned him. Sandra stiffened. What about him? You should consider a legal agreement that includes custody, visitation, and boundaries. If there is a conflict, it can affect the evaluation. The woman left. Sandra stood motionless in the doorway, her relief overshadowed by a new fear. Tony wasn't just a man she loved once. He was a legal reality, one she couldn't ignore anymore. That evening, Tony knocked. Sandra opened the door but didn't invite him in. He looked wrecked, dark circles, tense jaw, eyes haunted by guilt. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know she'd do something like that. But I should have." Sandra didn't soften. "My kids could have been taken. I know. You destroyed their stability." He flinched. "Tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix it. You can't fix everything by throwing yourself at it." She whispered. "Some things don't need fixing. They need to grow." Tony swallowed hard. "Then let me grow." She looked away, breath trembling. "I want legal visitation," he said quietly. Sandra's heart dropped. "You want to make this a court matter?" He said quickly, "I want to avoid court. I want something peaceful, clean, respectful, something that protects the kids from people like Vivian, and honestly, people like my father." Sandra's anger cracked. "Why now?" "Because I know what losing them feels like," he whispered. "And I never want them to feel that again." The sincerity disarmed her completely. "Sit," she murmured. He sat at her kitchen table, the table where she had nursed babies, cried alone, paid bills, and planned futures. "Please tell me what you're asking for," she said. Tony spoke carefully. "I want to be their father, not legally above you, not against you, beside you, equal, transparent, real." Sandra's heartbeat hammered painfully. "That's not simple. I don't want simple," he said. "I like what's right." The room fell silent. Sandra inhaled. "I can't trust you." Tony nodded slowly. "Then let me earn it." For the first time, she believed he meant it. But belief is fragile, and the moment they reached for something like hope, life delivered the next twist. A storm far larger than the first one that would break them both before it brought them back together. But neither of them knew that yet. They only knew this. Something had changed. For real this time. And nothing would be the same again. Sandra expected the fallout from the child services visit to settle slowly, like dust after a demolition. Instead, the aftermath arrived like another storm, loud, unexpected, and aimed directly at the fragile peace she and Tony had been building. The first hit came from the preschool. That Monday, as Sandra picked up the triplets, their teacher pulled her aside with a strained smile. "I just wanted to let you know," she said carefully. "Someone called the school asking questions about the kids, their home environment, their father." Sandra's pulse spiked. "Who? We can't disclose that." But they used terms that only someone familiar with your family situation would know. Sandra didn't need disclosure. She already knew. Vivian again. Fear twisted into anger so sharp, she tasted iron. That night, she sat at the kitchen table long after the kids went to sleep. She stared at the empty opposite chair, where Tony had sat during calmer evenings, helping with crayons or reading stories. He hadn't shown up since their conversation about legal visitation. He was giving her space, something she didn't think he was capable of in the early days. He was finally learning restraint. But tonight, she didn't want restraint. She wanted his voice. She dialed. He answered on the second ring, breathless. Sandra. Are you okay? Vivian called the preschool. Sandra said, voice shaking. Silence, then a quiet, deadly calm. I'll handle it. No, Sandra said quickly. If you confront her directly, she'll escalate. She's not afraid of you. That's the problem, he muttered. She should be afraid of what she's risking. I don't want retaliation, Sandra said. I want protection. I will protect you. His voice held no bravado this time, just determination sharpened by months of humility. Then meet me tomorrow morning, she said. We need a plan. The next morning, they met at a small diner off the highway. Sandra arrived first, scanning the room. Tension coiled tight in her spine. When Tony walked in, he looked different, not just tired, but hardened by a frustration he was barely containing. They sat across from each other. No kids, no distractions, just truth waiting to be spoken. Sandra began. Vivian won't stop unless she believes she has something to lose. She already lost me, Tony said. No, Sandra corrected. She lost the image of you, the man who served her world, the man she could display. But she thinks she can still own your narrative. That's what she's fighting for. Tony stared at his hands. I created that narrative. We both know that, Sandra said. But right now, we need to figure out how to keep her out of the children's lives legally, permanently. Tony nodded, jaw tight. I talked to my lawyer last night. Sandra stiffened, but didn't interrupt. We can request a no-contact clause. He continued, attached to our visitation agreement. If she continues to interfere, she'll face legal penalties. Sandra frowned. She's wealthy, connected. She could counter anything. She's wealthy. Tony agreed. But she's no longer connected. He looked up, eyes shadowed. My father's death changed everything. She no longer has the family name to hide behind. Sandra inhaled slowly. So we fight. No. Tony said, we protect. There's a difference. She studied him carefully. There was no arrogance in his voice, no entitlement, just clarity, responsibility, growth, the kind of growth she never imagined possible from the man who once tried to buy his way out of fatherhood. Okay, she whispered. We create a plan together. The words settled between them like a fragile promise. In the following weeks, Tony and Sandra met repeatedly with lawyers, therapists, and mediators. Not adversaries, but partners navigating a complicated path. The triplets were shielded from the tension, cocooned between school, playtime, and moments of joy Tony carefully carved out for them. At first, Sandra remained stiff during the meetings, afraid of slipping into old patterns. But Tony changed the tone slowly and consistently, with actions rather than declarations. He showed up early. He took notes. He asked questions about what she felt was safest for the children. He followed every recommendation without ego. He made no demands. It was disarming. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling mediation session, Sandra found herself on the courthouse steps with him. The afternoon sun cast long shadows, and people rushed around them in every direction. Tony cleared his throat. "I've been meaning to ask. How are you holding up?" Sandra exhaled. "I don't know. Some days I'm terrified. Some days I'm angry. Some days I'm proud of us." He blinked. "Us. Yes," she said softly. "Us." He looked away, overwhelmed. She hesitated before speaking again. "You're doing well." "Tony?" He swallowed. "I'm trying. I can see that." He turned back to her, emotion flickering across his face. "I don't ever want to be the source of your fear again." "You're not," she whispered. "Not anymore." Something passed between them, quiet, warm, unsettling in its power. They didn't touch, but the space between them shifted. One night, Sandra found a letter on her porch, handwritten, his handwriting. "Sandra, there are parts of me I'm still learning how to face, but you are the anchor in every version of my healing. Not because you saved me, but because you refused to let me destroy you. That strength teaches me how to be a better man. For the kids, for myself, and someday, maybe for you." She read it twice, then a third time. Then, she tucked it into her nightstand, where it stayed like a pulse she could touch whenever she needed to remember why she hadn't given up. What ultimately broke Vivian's campaign wasn't legal pressure, not a scandal, not threats. It was Tony. He visited her one final time. Sandra didn't go, but she heard about it afterwards from Tony himself, speaking with a heaviness that revealed just how deep that conversation cut him. "I told her the truth. He said that I didn't love her, that I never did, that the life we built was an illusion built on my fear of disappointing my father. I told her I didn't choose her. I was placed with her." Sandra listened quietly. She didn't scream. Tony said. She didn't attack. She just looked at me, as if she had finally seen through the man she had married. And she said, "Then go live the life you're actually reaching for," Sandra murmured. "That must have hurt." Tony nodded. "It did, but it set both of us free. A chapter closed. Not cleanly, not beautifully, but truthfully. And sometimes, the truth was enough." The final mediation meeting ended with an agreement that surprised everyone. Joint legal custody. Primary physical custody with Sandra. Structured visitation. Boundaries. Protect the children from external interference. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. After signing the documents, Sandra walked outside with Tony. The setting sun cast a golden hue over the parking lot. Their shadows stretched long in front of them. "It's done," she whispered. Tony nodded. "It's done." A soft wind brushed past. A moment of stillness bent around them, like the pause before a new beginning. Sandra turned toward him. "Do you want to come over tonight? The kids would love to celebrate." Tony's breath caught. "And you?" Sandra didn't hesitate. "I would too." He exhaled slowly, as if in relief, or gratitude, or something more profound that scared him. "Then yes," he said quietly. "I'd love that." They walked toward their cars, side by side. Not lovers yet, not strangers, not enemies, Something in between. Something becoming. The becoming that feels like destiny, pulling two people toward a collision they can't avoid and no longer want to. Tony moved slowly that night, carefully, respectfully, into the small home that had seen Sandra through heartbreak, birth, survival, and rebirth. The triplets cheered when he walked in, wrapping around his legs like vines. He lifted Caspian with practiced ease. Lorelei sprinted to show him her newest block tower. Emily tugged him toward her crayons, wordlessly asking if he wanted to color. And he did. He always did. Sandra watched from the doorway, a warmth spreading through her chest she hadn't felt in years. Not infatuation, not illusion, something steadier, something earned. After the kids went to bed, Sandra found Tony in the kitchen washing dishes without being asked. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You know you don't have to do that," she said. "I want to," he replied. She smiled faintly. "You've changed," he responded without looking up. "You changed me." She approached slowly. "No, you changed yourself. I just stopped cushioning your consequences." He dried his hands and faced her. "Either way, I'm better because of you." Their eyes held for a long moment. "Come outside," she said finally. They stepped into the quiet backyard. The night sky was clear, stars scattered like blessings across the darkness. Sandra wrapped her arms around herself out of habit, then stopped when Tony draped a blanket over her shoulders without a word. She whispered, "Thank you. You don't have to thank me for care," he said softly. "You deserve it." Her breath trembled. "What are we now, Tony?" "I want to be whatever you're willing to give me space to be. And the kids. They're everything," he said. "Every decision I make now begins with them." Sandra studied him carefully, searching for cracks, deception, ego, anything that used to define him. But all she saw was sincerity. "Please tell me what you want," she whispered. He stepped closer, slowly, giving her every chance to move away. "I want a life with you," he said. "Not a perfect one, a real one. With chaos and kids and hard days and soft mornings, and the kind of love people fight to keep." Her heart thudded painfully. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," he said. "But maybe being scared is the first sign we're doing something right." She laughed softly. "Maybe. Let me say something," he murmured. She nodded. "When you walked into my office 3 years ago," he said, "I thought I had everything figured out. A future planned for me. A marriage arranged around expectations. A life that wasn't really mine." He paused, stepping closer still. "And when you walked out of my life, pregnant with children I didn't deserve, the world lost its shape. I let fear win because I didn't know anything else." Sandra's throat tightened. "But now," Tony whispered, "now I choose differently. Not because I'm reinventing myself for you, but because you showed me the life I actually want to live." Her voice was barely a whisper. "And what life is that?" "This one," he said. "With you, with them, with us." Sandra's eyes filled. "Tony," she breathed. He raised his hand but waited inches from her cheek, asking permission in silence. She leaned in. He touched her. And every wall she built for survival cracked open, not to break her, but to let something new in. He kissed her gently at first, then deeply, with reverence, with emotion forged from loss, regret, longing, and hope. Her hands curled into his shirt, his arms wrapped around her, like he knew exactly how strong to hold her without breaking her again. When they finally pulled apart, they rested their foreheads together, breath mixing. This time, Sandra whispered, "Don't run. Never again." He vowed. Months passed with intention, not rushing, not collapsing, building. They established routines, shared school drop-offs, movie nights, parenting mishaps, laughter, tears, the raw, ordinary beauty of a blended family learning itself. Rosalind approved. Dorothy adored. The children thrived. One morning, 6 months after the kiss in the backyard, Tony knelt in the kitchen among spilled cereal and crayons and open lunchboxes, and a chaos that made him smile instead of flinch. Sandra froze, eyes wide. He held a ring elegant, simple, intentional. "I'm not promising perfection," he said. "Just presence. Just a partnership. Just love that grows instead of burns." His voice wavered. "Marry me. Not because of the past, because of the future." Tears slid down Sandra's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. The triplets screamed in celebration. The wedding was small, just family, just joy. On a beach where storms once terrified them, the sky is now clear and endless. Tony cried. Sandra laughed. The children ran in circles, throwing flowers instead of petals. It was perfect in every imperfect way. Tony adopted all 3 children legally, signing the papers with shaking hands. When he finished, Lorelei climbed onto his lap and touched his cheek. "You're ours now," she whispered. Tony broke completely. Years later, Sandra stood on the shore, watching Tony teach the children now, older, how to stand on a surfboard. They fell. They laughed. They tried again. He turned toward her, grinning, salt water dripping from his hair. She walked to him, barefoot in the sand, heart full. "You happy?" she asked. Tony wrapped an arm around her waist. "I'm living the life I prayed I'd get a second chance at." Sandra rested her head against him. "I'm glad I didn't walk away for good," she whispered. "You walked far enough that I had to chase you," he said gently. "And that chase made me a man worthy of being caught." She smiled and kissed him with the certainty of a woman who had chosen right. Their children shouted for them to join the water, hand in hand. They ran toward the waves, stronger, wiser, healed, whole. A family forged, not from perfection, but from redemption, forgiveness, and love chosen again and again, forever and always.